My name is Grace Miller. For most of my life, peace was a small house on the edge of town, the sound of a ticking clock, and my son's laughter echoing down the narrow hallway. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough love to fill every empty corner, enough hope to make the hard days worth it. After my husband passed, it was just me and Adil. He was barely a teenager then, quiet, serious, with eyes that carried more responsibility than a child should ever bear. I remember working long shifts, coming home tired, and finding him waiting at the door with a smile and a cup of tea. He used to say, "Mom, one day you'll never have to work again." And I'd smile, pretending to believe him, even when the bills on the table told another story. Years passed. Somehow, the boy who once clung to my arm became the man who stood taller than me, speaking with confidence, earning respect wherever he went. Watching him succeed felt like watching the sun rise after a storm that had lasted years. Then one evening, he came home looking nervous, the kind of nervous that only good news can bring. He sat down, cleared his throat, and said softly, "Mom, I met someone." I smiled. My heart skipped. Every mother waits for that moment, the day her child finds love. Her name, he said, was Sophia Khan. She was beautiful, educated, from a respected family. He spoke about her with a glow in his eyes I hadn't seen before. I was happy for him, truly. But behind my smile, a quiet fear stirred, the kind that whispers, "Will I be enough for her family?" Because the truth was simple. We lived modestly. Our furniture was old, our savings small, and I had long learned how to make tea look fancy even when the cups were chipped. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the dim kitchen light, stirring cold tea, lost in thought. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't insecure. I was just uncertain. People can be kind, or they can be cruel, I thought. And the difference usually shows when they think you have nothing to offer. Still, I told myself what I always did in moments of doubt. "Grace, don't expect much. Just smile, stay polite, and pray they treat your son right." I didn't know then that this simple promise to myself would soon be tested in ways I could never imagine. Because sometimes storms don't announce their arrival. They begin with silence. A few weeks after Adil shared his news, I found myself standing outside a grand white house with tall glass doors and a driveway that could fit my entire street. That was the Khan's residence, Sophia's family home. Adil was excited, beaming like a child, but I could feel my palms growing damp. My clothes were clean but simple, a plain blue dress and an old shawl I'd worn to countless family gatherings. I had insisted on keeping it that way. First impressions, I told myself, should be honest. When the door opened, I was greeted by Mrs. Khan, a tall woman in an expensive silk outfit and jewelry that sparkled under the afternoon sun. Her smile was perfect, a little too perfect, the kind that stops at the lips but never reaches the eyes. "Oh, you must be Adil's mother," she said sweetly. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Her voice carried the kind of politeness that made me straighten up instinctively, as if I had already done something wrong. Then came Mr. Khan, her husband, a businessman as Adil had mentioned. He extended a hand, firm and brief. His eyes scanned me the way people read the label on a product, checking for value. "Welcome, Mrs. Miller," he said. "We've heard so much about you. It's good to finally meet the woman who raised such a hard-working young man." It sounded like praise, but there was something in the tone, something slightly detached, as if the compliment was more about my usefulness than my worth. I smiled and nodded. "Thank you. He's always made me proud." We sat in their elegant living room, soft beige sofas, crystal decor, paintings that probably cost more than my car. Adil was relaxed, unaware of the tiny currents shifting in the air. Mrs. Khan leaned forward slightly, stirring her tea with slow, deliberate motions. Sophia mentioned you live alone now, Mrs. Miller. Must be quiet, isn't it? I nodded. It is, but peace has its own beauty. She smiled faintly. Of course, of course. I've always admired people who find happiness in simple lifestyles. There it was, a phrase wrapped in sweetness but sharp enough to cut. Simple lifestyles. I caught the faint look she exchanged with her husband. He sipped his tea and said, You know, in our circle, people are often caught up in appearances. It's refreshing to meet someone so grounded. Grounded. Another polite word that really meant ordinary. But I didn't flinch. I didn't correct them. I smiled. Warm, gentle, maybe even a little naive. Because I realized something in that moment. These people were testing me. They wanted to know how far below them I stood. So I decided to make it easy for them. I'm not used to fancy things, I said softly. We've always lived simply, but I believe kindness makes any home beautiful. Mrs. Khan nodded, pretending to agree, though her eyes wandered to the hem of my old dress. I felt the weight of their judgment, quiet, polished, and perfectly disguised. But I also felt something else rising inside me, a strange calm. I decided to act poor and quiet, not to fool them, but to see their real faces, I told myself. And as I watched their carefully measured smiles and subtle exchanges, I knew I had made the right choice. Because sometimes, to truly understand people, you have to let them underestimate you first. It was a Friday evening when Adil told me the Khans had invited us for dinner. He was thrilled, said it was their way of getting to know the family better. I smiled for his sake, though deep down I already knew this dinner wasn't about family. It was an interview. When we arrived, the house glowed like a palace. Soft music played in the background. The smell of expensive perfume lingered in the air, and every corner of that dining room seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." Mrs. Khan greeted us with her usual polished warmth. "Oh, Mrs. Miller, how lovely to see you again. I do hope you like continental food. I wasn't sure if you're used to it." I smiled politely. "I'll enjoy whatever's served, thank you." We sat at a long mahogany table that could easily seat 10, though there were only 4 of us, Mr. and Mrs. Khan at one end, and me and Adil at the other. The distance between us felt symbolic. The dinner began with small talk, or what they called small talk. To me, it felt more like polite interrogation. "So, Mrs. Miller," Mr. Khan began, "you've lived in the same neighborhood for how long?" "Almost 25 years, I replied with a smile. "Ah, must be quite humble living there," he said, stirring his soup without looking at me. "It's quiet," I said simply, "and that's all I need." He nodded absently, as if checking a box on an invisible form. Mrs. Khan joined in, her tone sweet but sharp underneath. "You know, Grace, I was telling Sophia earlier, it's amazing how you've managed everything on your own. You must be such a simple woman." Simple. There it was again. The word they loved using. "Yes," I said, "I suppose I am. Life taught me simplicity before it taught me comfort." Adil laughed lightly, trying to keep the mood light, but I could feel his unease. He didn't want to see it, but he knew. He could sense the thin layer of ice under their smiles. Then came the advice. "You should really treat yourself more, Grace," Mrs. Khan said. "Maybe buy a few elegant outfits. You'll be attending plenty of social events once Sophia's part of the family." I nodded again, pretending gratitude. I'll keep that in mind. Inside, I wondered why generosity often sounded like insult when spoken by the proud. The meal continued. Questions about my background, education, family circle. Each one felt carefully chosen, wrapped in politeness but meant to measure worth. I didn't fight it. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even look uncomfortable. I smiled, I listened, I answered softly. Because when people are trying to prove their superiority, the most powerful thing you can do is let them talk. Every word felt like a test, I thought to myself. Every smile like a performance. And while they played their roles with practiced grace, I sat quietly, watching, learning. I noticed the way Mrs. Khan's smile faded when Adil mentioned my name with affection. I noticed how Mr. Khan's expression tightened when I spoke of hard work instead of wealth. By the time dessert was served, I knew enough. I knew what kind of family they were. The kind that measured people by tablecloths and accents, not hearts and honesty. Still, I stayed gentle. I thanked them for the meal. I complimented their home. I even helped gather the dishes before leaving, much to Mrs. Khan's surprise. On the drive home, Adil asked softly, "Mom, are you okay?" I smiled. "Of course, dear. It was a lovely dinner." But inside, my thoughts whispered something else entirely. They think they've read me, but they've only seen what I allowed. They don't know who I am. Not yet. And that night I realized something important. Sometimes silence isn't submission. It's strategy. The evening after that dinner felt heavier than usual. Adil stayed back at the Khan's house to spend time with Sophia, and I was invited to stay overnight in their guest room. I didn't want to, but Mrs. Khan insisted. "Oh, it's too late to drive home, Grace. You'll be more comfortable here." Comfortable. That was a word she loved to use. The room was beautiful, yes. Elegant furniture, soft lighting, curtains that looked like they belonged in a hotel, but it didn't feel warm. It felt staged. Every detail said luxury, but not a single thing said home. I changed into my nightgown and tried to sleep. The house was too quiet, except for the faint hum of voices from the hallway. I told myself not to listen, that private conversations were none of my business. But when you've lived your whole life reading between words, your ears notice more than your eyes ever could. I got up and stepped quietly toward the half-open door. Their voices became clearer, Mr. and Mrs. Khan, talking near the living room, unaware I was still awake. "Well," Mrs. Khan laughed softly, "our Sophia is marrying below her class. We'll have to polish that family up a bit." Her laughter was light, careless, like what she said meant nothing cruel, but it landed like a stone in my chest. Mr. Khan replied, "I agree. Adil is decent enough, but his background? Let's just say he's lucky Sophia even noticed him." They chuckled together, that quiet, private laugh of people who think they've won. I stood there frozen, my fingers clutching the edge of the door frame. I wanted to walk in, to tell them they were wrong, that I wasn't ashamed of my life or my son. But I didn't. I just stood there, breathing slowly, letting their words burn through me, not as pain, but as fuel. Below their class. Polish that family. How easily people turn pride into poison. When they finished talking, I stepped back, returned to the bed, and sat there in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. My heart felt tight, but my face was calm. I could have cried. I could have confronted them. I could have told Adil what I heard. But I didn't, because I understood something in that moment. People like the Khans thrive on reactions. They want to see you break, to confirm the story they've already written about you. So I decided not to give them that satisfaction. The next morning, I walked into the dining area as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Khan greeted me with her usual polished tone. "Good morning, Grace. I hope you slept well." I smiled, my voice gentle but steady. "Yes, thank you. I slept peacefully." Peacefully. The same word I used for every night I'd endured something difficult and chose silence over anger. As I sipped my tea, she kept talking about wedding plans and decorations. I nodded, even complimented her taste. Inside, though, my thoughts were clear and sharp. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. I just smiled the next morning and let them dig their own grave. Because the truth is, people who look down on others always end up falling into the holes they dig. And I had just decided I would stand by, quiet and patient, until they did. That night, after returning home from the Khans, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city outside was asleep, but my thoughts were awake. Too loud, too alive. Their words kept echoing in my mind. Below their class. I smiled faintly to myself, the kind of smile that hides old pain and deeper stories. They saw a simple woman in plain clothes and thought they knew everything. But they didn't. They didn't know the storms I had survived to reach this calm. When Adil was just a child, life tested me in ways I never imagined. His father, Daniel, was a good man, kind, hardworking, but fate has a way of rewriting lives in cruel ink. A sudden illness took him from us before Adil turned 10. I still remember the night I sat beside the hospital bed, holding Daniel's hand as the machines went quiet. I didn't have the luxury to break down. I looked at my son's small, tear-streaked face and knew, from that moment, that I had to become everything: mother, father, protector, and provider. The following years were a blur of struggle. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at a small school as a cleaner, and evenings at a bakery, washing dishes until midnight. My hands were always cracked from the soap and my feet ached every night. But every time I looked at Adil sleeping peacefully, it was worth it. There were days when I skipped meals just so he could have a proper lunch for school. I stitched his uniforms myself, using old fabric scraps, making sure he never looked neglected. He didn't know half of it. I didn't want him to. I wanted his childhood to be lighter than my burden. Every month, I saved a small portion, coins and notes tucked away in a biscuit tin, for his education. People laughed when I said he'd go to university someday. They said dreams like that were for the rich. But dreams don't check your bank account before choosing you. Adil grew up watching me hustle, and somehow he absorbed my quiet strength. He studied hard, earned scholarships, and got a job right after graduation. The first time he brought home his salary, he hugged me and said, "Mom, now it's my turn." That was the moment I felt rich, not in wealth, but in everything that truly mattered. So when the Khans looked at me and saw a poor widow, I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. They couldn't see that behind this simple dress stood decades of endurance. Behind my silence was power, not loud, but unbreakable. They called me poor, but they didn't know I had already built an empire, not of money, but of resilience. And resilience, once earned, can never be taken away. After that night, something inside me shifted. I realized anger wouldn't serve me. Silence would. So I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't defend myself. Instead, I'd watch. I would let the Khans believe every assumption they'd already made about me, that I was poor, uneducated, and harmless. I would nod politely, smile gently, and pretend I didn't notice their little smirks and careful words. Because sometimes the best way to reveal a person's true nature is to give them space to reveal it themselves. The next few weeks were a series of polite encounters: afternoon teas, family meetings, wedding discussions. Mrs. Khan often guided me on what was appropriate for their kind of people. "Grace, dear, you might want to wear something brighter next time," she'd say sweetly. "You know, we don't want people to think you're mourning all the time." I'd smile and nod, pretending to appreciate her advice, even though every word dripped with condescension. Mr. Khan wasn't much better. He spoke to me as though explaining life to a child. "You must be proud your son's marrying into a family like ours," he'd say, sipping his tea. "We'll make sure he learns how to carry himself in higher circles." Higher circles. I remember repeating those words in my mind and almost laughing. They thought wealth was altitude, that it made them higher than others. Sophia, my future daughter-in-law, mostly stayed quiet during these exchanges. She seemed gentle but hesitant. Sometimes, her eyes darted toward her parents as if she was afraid to speak her mind. I didn't judge her. I knew how strong family influence could be. Still, I kept up my act. I let my sentences stumble now and then, pretended not to understand certain words, and smiled too often, the way people expect a simple woman to smile. And every time I did, they became bolder, showing me more of who they truly were. They underestimated me completely. They thought my silence meant ignorance. But silence is observation in disguise. I noticed the way Mrs. Khan's tone softened only when rich guests visited. I saw how Mr. Khan's pride swelled when others praised their social status. And I noticed how quickly kindness vanished when they thought no one important was around. People show their true hearts when they think no one's watching. and I was watching everything. What they didn't know was, this wasn't just politeness anymore. It was a test, and soon their results would speak for themselves. Weddings, they say, are supposed to bring families together. But in our case, it only revealed how far apart we truly were. As soon as the preparations began, the Khans took control of everything. The venue, the decor, the guest list, even the color of the napkins. It wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a performance. Every decision was about appearance, about how it would look. Mrs. Khan called me one afternoon, her tone dripping with polite concern. "Grace, dear, we've been finalizing the guest list. I noticed you have quite a few simple friends. Perhaps we should keep it intimate, you understand, right? It's just about maintaining a certain standard." A certain standard. Those words stung more than any insult could. They weren't even trying to hide their superiority anymore. I took a slow breath, smiled gently, and said, "Of course, Mrs. Khan, you do what you think is best." She smiled in relief, thinking I'd surrendered. But she didn't realize I was just watching. Every day brought a new drama. Mr. Khan complained about expenses, not because they couldn't afford them, but because he wanted to remind everyone who was paying. "We're covering most of it anyway," he'd say loudly, making sure I heard. "It's important the event reflects our family's reputation." And through it all, Adil stood in the middle, torn between two worlds. He tried to keep the peace, balancing his love for Sophia with his loyalty to me. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with quiet guilt, as if he wished I'd fight back. But I didn't, because this wasn't a battle worth fighting. Not yet. During one of the dress fittings, Mrs. Khan suggested I wear something light and simple so that Sophia could shine. "We don't want the mother of the groom outshining the bride," she joked. I laughed softly. "Don't worry," I said. "I've spent my whole life making sure others shine." She didn't catch the meaning, but my son did. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw the storm building behind his calm face. He was starting to see what I saw. Still, I chose peace. I kept my tone gentle, my words few, and my presence small. Because the truth is, when people think you're weak, they reveal everything they try to hide. I stayed calm. They thought I was weak, but silence isn't weakness. It's a mirror. And soon, that mirror would reflect every face in its truest form, including theirs. The wedding day arrived like a polished dream. The hall was decorated in soft golds and creams, every flower perfectly arranged, every light carefully placed to make the room shimmer. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits whispered excitedly as they took their seats. From the outside, it looked flawless, a celebration of love, unity, and happiness. But inside, I could feel the tension, like the quiet tremor before a storm. The Khans moved through the crowd with practiced smiles, shaking hands and nodding as though everyone was impressed with their wealth and elegance. I stayed close to Adil, smiling at acquaintances, laughing softly at jokes, and letting the family's confidence fill the room, all while watching. Watching everything. And then, just as the ceremony was about to begin, an unexpected guest arrived, a man in a plain gray suit holding a small folder. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the microphone, cleared his throat, and began speaking in a calm, steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to share some facts about Mr. Richard Khan and his recent business dealings. I was his partner for years, and I have documents proving mismanagement and fraud that have gone undisclosed until now." Gasps filled the room. Some guests whispered, others froze completely. Faces turned pale, the Khan's smiles faltering under the weight of reality. Mrs. Khan's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her daughter's arm. I felt my heart remain steady, my expression composed. I didn't need to speak. This moment, unplanned, uninvited, undeniable, was justice enough. The proud family, who had measured others by appearances, were now stripped of their illusion. Sophia looked at her parents, confusion and fear flickering across her face. Adil gripped my hand instinctively, his eyes wide, realizing for the first time how deeply he had been shielded from the truth. Every polite gesture, every carefully crafted smile, every subtle insult the Khans had thrown my way. All of it was unraveling in front of everyone. The truth always shows up, even uninvited, I thought quietly, letting the words sink in. I didn't gloat. I didn't point. I simply observed as I always had. Because in that moment, their pride, their arrogance, their carefully maintained image, all of it, was collapsing on its own. And I knew that sometimes the universe delivers what no one can plan. Justice doesn't knock politely at the door. It walks in unannounced and leaves the guilty speechless. The hall was still buzzing with whispers when Sophia turned toward me. Her face, once calm and composed, had softened, edged with shock, confusion, and finally, realization. She looked at her parents, at the trembling elegance that had seemed untouchable just moments ago, and I could see the weight of truth settle on her shoulders. Their arrogance, their constant need to judge and belittle me, had finally cracked under the spotlight of reality. Sophia's hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Mom, she began, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't understand how badly you were treated." Her words were small, almost shy, but her eyes said more than any apology could. There was regret there, raw and unfiltered, a recognition of the years of subtle cruelty I had endured in silence. Adil stood beside her, his face pale. I had never seen him so conflicted. He looked at me with a mixture of pride and guilt, as if he suddenly understood all the dinners where I had smiled through judgment, all the conversations where I had nodded quietly while the cons measured my worth. He didn't need me to explain anything. His eyes told me he had finally seen the truth. Meanwhile, the cons were scrambling, trying to smooth over the scandal that had just exposed them. Their polished smiles faltered. The confidence they carried like armor now crumbled. Mrs. Khan's hands were pressed to her face, and Mr. Khan's jaw tightened as whispers circled the room, carrying the weight of disapproval and shock. And I realized something. I didn't need to say a word. That night I didn't need to speak. Their guilt did the talking. Every glance, every faltering gesture, every tremor of fear and shame revealed more than any argument ever could. I stayed calm, letting them digest their own actions, letting the truth settle around them. For years, I had endured their quiet judgment, their subtle arrogance. And now, without confrontation or anger, they had unmasked themselves entirely. It was a powerful moment, not for revenge, but for clarity, for justice in its quietest, most unshakable form. And as I looked at my son and Sophia, I knew the lesson of that night would remain with them forever. That integrity, patience, and silence can sometimes be louder than words. Just as the initial shock from the scandal began to ripple through the crowd, I felt a familiar presence at my side. Daniel Brooks, an old friend and former lawyer I had trusted for years, stepped forward with a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with the chaos around us. He held a folder of documents, neatly organized, official, undeniable. He addressed the guests in a clear voice that carried across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you jump to conclusions about Grace Miller's background, I think you should see the truth." He opened the folder, revealing property deeds, investment statements, and legal papers showing that I, Grace Miller, quietly owned the very mansion and several properties the cons had used to flaunt their wealth. The ones they had boasted about endlessly, the symbols of status they held over me. Gasps spread through the room. Faces paled. Even Sophia froze, her hand instinctively moving to her chest as realization washed over her. I let the silence hang. I didn't need to speak. My calm, composed presence said more than words ever could. I never needed to prove myself, I thought, letting the moment settle like a stone dropped in water. But sometimes truth has its own timing. The cons were speechless, their carefully constructed facade shattered. Mrs. Khan clutched her pearls, staring at me as if I were some ghost who had walked out of her past, untouchable, unseen but far more powerful than she had ever imagined. Mr. Khan's jaw tightened, his eyes darting nervously from document to document, unable to find a single defense. Sophia's eyes filled with awe and a little shame. "Mom, she whispered, voice trembling. I smiled softly at her, placing a gentle hand over hers. I did what any mother would for her child. Everything else was never important. Adil's hand found mine. His grip was firm, steady, pride and respect shining in his eyes. The room, once filled with judgment and arrogance, had transformed. Silence replaced whispers, awe replaced disdain, and the very people who had measured my worth by appearances now understood. I had never been below anyone. Sometimes I realized the quietest victories are the most powerful. And sometimes the world only learns the truth when it is ready to see it. And at that moment I knew I had not just survived their judgment, I had outlasted it. In the days that followed, the echoes of the wedding scandal rippled far beyond the hall. Word spread quickly, the Khan's financial misdeeds, their arrogance, their constant need to appear superior. It was all out in the open. Social circles that once envied their wealth now whispered behind their backs. Business associates distanced themselves, and friends who had admired their lavish lifestyle now saw the truth. A family obsessed with image, blind to integrity. Their reputation crumbled almost as quickly as their financial standing. Sophia approached me one evening, her eyes filled with sincere regret. "Mom, I am so sorry for how my parents treated you. I didn't see it before, but now, I understand. Please forgive me." I looked at her, my heart softening. She wasn't responsible for her parents' actions. "I forgive you, Sophia," I said quietly. "But the lesson must be remembered, not just forgotten." Adil stood beside her, pride and guilt warring in his expression. He felt proud that I had handled everything with calm and dignity, yet guilty that his mother had endured so much silently. He finally understood the quiet strength I had carried through years of hardship, strength that had now taught both him and Sophia a life lesson they wouldn't forget. The Khans, on the other hand, retreated into silence. I saw them in passing, faces pale, pride shattered. Their attempts to control and belittle others had backfired spectacularly. They had lost the one thing they valued most: respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge. I simply walked forward, my head held high, dignity intact, knowing that integrity carries a weight that no arrogance can shake. They lost everything trying to appear rich. I lost nothing by being real. And in that quiet triumph, I realized something profound. True wealth isn't measured by money or possessions, but by the strength to remain authentic in a world that constantly tests you. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely free. The storm had passed, and I was still standing, unshaken, unbroken, and undeniably whole. I stand by the window now, looking out over the city lights, and I let the quiet settle around me. The chaos, the judgment, the whispers, all of it has faded. What remains is something far stronger, far steadier: understanding, reflection, and peace. I think of the Khans, of their arrogance, and of the countless times I had been underestimated. I smile softly, not with pride, but with the calm of knowing that their assumptions never defined me. Some people mistake silence for weakness, I whisper to myself, my voice gentle, steady. But silence is power. It hears, sees, and waits. Through years of struggle, of quiet endurance, I learned that patience often speaks louder than words. That dignity is louder than anger. That grace can dismantle even the most carefully built illusions. I glance at Adil, now standing beside me, and Sophia, who has begun to understand the depth of what I endured. Their eyes meet mine, and I see respect there, not fear, admiration, not judgment. I realize that true wealth is not measured in estates, investments, or social standing. True wealth, I continue, isn't money. It's grace under fire. And as the night deepens, the city lights twinkle like a quiet applause for the resilience of those who endure silently, and who, in the end, emerge stronger, unshaken, and whole. I turn back from the window, feeling the weight of the lessons learned, the truths revealed, and the dignity preserved. The story may have ended for others, but for me, it is only a beginning. A testament to the quiet power of patience, the strength of character, and the subtle, unstoppable force of truth.